with the highly anticipated G20 summit scheduled to be held in India's capital just days away and the global spotlight turning to the country, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said, and I quote, "The G20 is one of the institutions that is being looked at with hope by many countries because the world is looking for actions and outcomes, no matter where they come from." That's what the Prime Minister said in an interview to news agency The Press Trust of India, while highlighting the historic significance of the upcoming summit, which India is hosting for the very first time. The Prime Minister added, and I quote, "In this context, India's position within the global framework becomes especially pertinent. As a diverse nation, the mother of democracy, home to one of the world's largest populations of youth and the growth engine of the world, India has a lot to contribute to the shaping of the future of the world. The G20 has provided a platform for India to further its human-centric vision and has also collaboratively worked towards innovative solutions to problems that are faced by humanity as a whole." Interestingly, Prime Minister Modi also emphasized on the need for the United Nations to adapt to the 21st century's multipolar world. In a reference to the much-needed UN Security Council reforms that are often talked about and debated, he said, "Today's world is a multipolar world where institutions are extremely important for a rules-based order that is fair and sensitive to all concerns. However, institutions can retain relevance only when they change with the times. A mid-20th century approach cannot serve the world in the 21st century. So our international institutions need to recognize changing realities, expand their decision-making forums, relook at their priorities, and ensure representation of voices that matter." India's call for United Nations reform has been a long-standing one, with a particular focus on UN Security Council. New Delhi, alongside Brazil, Germany and Japan, have persistently advocated for reforms within the Security Council, including the expansion of the list of permanent members. All right, let's go back to Shri at this point. Shri, the Prime Minister reiterating what has been India's stand for a long time now, that a lot of the global institutions today, starting with the United Nations, are out of sync with the times. They need to adapt to, the fast evolving global realities, which would of course suggest that a country like India deserves a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Now, as India gears up to host the G20 summit, do you believe that, we've been talking so much about how India's stature has grown globally in recent times. The fact that we are now the G20 host says a lot about, how far we've come. Do you believe that India hosting this event could, in a sense, work towards strengthening India's case for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council, or is that being too optimistic?
Well, Neha, the reality is we didn't need a G20 summit to strengthen our case. As one of the largest countries, one of the freest democracies in Asia, I think it makes sense for India, in any case, to be part of the UN Permanent Security Council. Now, UN specifically, it's almost 70 years old now as an institution. It has two important roles it must fulfill as a United Nations body. One is that it must help keep peace around the world. And second, it must prevent any other genocide like what was carried out by Hitler against the Jewish population in Germany. It must keep it from happening again. Now, if you look at UN's track record on both counts, it has fared miserably. And what is it? Two instances come to my mind. One is, even as something as simple as investigating Syria's use of sarin, chemical gas, against its its fighters. That, and then the Rwanda civil war, where more than 8 lakh people were killed in just 100 days. I think these are two important instances where the UN has utterly failed its mandate, its duty. So, and the root cause of the problem, Neha, is essentially the Permanent Council, which is a 5-member cabal these days. And frankly, UK, France, they are not really the big superpowers that they were once upon a time. UK certainly not. So there has been case for the expansion of the Security Council to India and to even Japan, so that you have a 7-member instead of a 5-member Security Council. But we know that as long as China and Russia, maybe China more in relation to India, China is there, this is not going to become a reality because even one vote means that it can be vetoed. So that is a completely nonsensical system out of which any important multilateral framework needs to come out of. And I think G20 was never designed and never meant to be a replacement for UN. It was more focused on international economic development. But I think what Prime Minister Modi is driving at is the need for a newer, a better UN. We had, before UN, we had the League of Nations, which was ineffective, so United Nations were brought in. Now, after 70 years, if United Nations is not working properly, maybe it's time to come up with another multilateral agency which does not make the same mistake as UN in terms of creating a five-member permanent council where vetoes will negate any attempt at moving forward or doing good for the world. So we do need a new framework, a new multilateral agency, Neha, and that must be designed in consultation with countries like India, Japan, Brazil, which are now the the new stakeholders, the emerging powers, and I think the old empires, the old superpowers, so-called superpowers, need to make way for the newer countries and give them more say, given that our track record around the world has been far more peaceful than their own track record, Neha.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, Shri, the Russian foreign minister recently said that if Ukraine is mentioned in the New Delhi declaration, we're going to block it unless our viewpoint is reflected. And then he goes on to say, we are open to having any discussion on the Ukraine war at the United Nations. Let's not have a discussion on that here at G20. But this is where the trouble lies, that there is this perception around the world, as you mentioned, that the United Nations has failed the world, which is probably why you now have a situation where geopolitics is dominating the agenda of an economic forum such as G20. Would you agree?
Exactly, Neha. That's absolutely the reason why. And honestly, I don't see any harm in, if the Ukraine-Russia war is made, is given weightage in G20, because ultimately a war that hangs over the rest of the world in terms of food security, food inflation, security of nation, there's a threat of a nuclear war that potentially could happen. Now, these are things which impact all nations. So it's not just like Russia and Ukraine are going to be impacted. The whole world is going to be impacted. So I don't personally see any harm if G20 member groups decide that a peace solution for the Russia-Ukraine war can be hammered using this platform under India's leadership this year. I don't see there's any harm in that. But, these are, again, intractable issues, Neha, and there are no easy solutions to these problems. So I think we just have to be at it and try to, create newer venues, newer opportunities. And that is why, Neha, it is important for people like Xi Jinping to attend these summits so that there is world consensus which can be, achieved on certain important issues and which then becomes binding on all member countries and the world at large, Neha.
Well, these are certainly intractable issues, as you pointed out, Shri, and the concern is, are they likely to cast a long shadow on the outcomes of the upcoming G20 summit? I guess we will find out in less than a week.